Good day, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Woven Wings Live, where we bring you wisdom and tools for vibrant living. I'm Gabe Crane. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Rahul Deedwania. And if you enjoy listening to us on this show, please share this work with a friend who you think might benefit from the topics we talk about here, and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps other folks to connect with this valuable material. You can find links to different ways to connect with us in our show description. If you're not watching this on YouTube already, links to our YouTube channel where you have videos of this podcast, and also ways you can sign up for our newsletter to follow along on our journey. Today's topic is a very interesting topic related to the Enneagram and our relationship with God, keeping in line with our theme this season of exploring the notion of God or the experience of God, or as I like to say, Rahul, God for ordinary people, or God for folks like you and me, or most of us out there who are trying to figure out our relationship with the divine, with the beyond, and maybe link different ideas around spirituality and divinity with other topics like science and psychology and cultural diversity. And so our guest today is Heath Davis Havlick, who is a speaker, author, and Riso Hudson certified Enneagram teacher. And we are going to be discussing Heath's new book, Know Yourself to Know God. Her initial book, Becoming Your True You, was a double finalist in the National Indie Excellence Awards. And we're going to be exploring this relationship with Heath's upbringing within the Christian church, her discovery of the Enneagram, and really what the relationship is between these two different elements. So I think a working title for our episode today is Know Yourself to Know God. And Heath is going to be taking us along on that journey. So before we go any further, Rahul, it's great to be here with you again. And I'm curious how you are doing and what you're thinking about as we set off on this journey with Heath today.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. There are a few things I'm excited to explore today. One is I was thinking back to one of our original intentions with the show, way back 3 or 4 years ago now, and one of those intentions was, hey, let's connect with people across different wisdom traditions and religions and spiritual frameworks and whatnot. And I think there's a natural curiosity I have just around that. And we've had people from different backgrounds, and just kind of Heath's background coming from the Christian faith, and what that means and how that influenced her story is something I'm just very much looking forward to unpacking. And then I think the larger topic, right, of, hey, like, how do we tie this notion of self-discovery? How do we merge it and make it feel integrated with spiritual or religious study and religious growth and religious exploration? Is something that I think really speaks to the spiritual but not religious, type moniker that we hear a lot, that we've talked about for ourselves, that we've even talked about as maybe the audience for our show, in a way where it's like, hey, like, there's this whole world of tools and knowledge from something like the Enneagram through all of psychology, in a way, right, that's oriented towards self-discovery from a particular lens. And then it's like, hey, how do we marry that with being part of a faith tradition? And can those two things coexist, or are they at odds with each other? And I think that is such a central inquiry even to my own path right now, that I'm very excited just to hear about Heath's journey and experience through that, and to see what insights we can glean from that conversation.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing. What you're sharing sparks a lot of thoughts and questions for me too, but I'm going to put them on hold and bring them up in our conversation here with Heath, because I think Heath has a lot to share with us. And so on that note, I want to welcome Heath Davis Havlick to the show. Welcome, Heath. Again, Heath is a speaker, author, and Riso Hudson certified Enneagram teacher. Her first book, Becoming Your True You, was a double finalist in the National Indie Excellence Awards. And her new book, Know Yourself to Know God, comes out in March. So we're getting a sneak peek here and an exciting debut that's on its way. Heath is the founder of Dearly Beloved Enneagram Training, which offers education and mentoring. And she lives in Santa Cruz, California, with her husband of 33 years, Tom, and their cat, Jax. Heath, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So I guess just as a starting point, one of the thoughts that came up for me as Rahul was sharing there in her introduction is I feel like you teach the Enneagram, and my associations with the Enneagram are kind of, and I'll be a little coarse in my description here, like they're kind of new agey, kind of like a spiritual system that's like practiced by spiritual but not religious people, and yet as I've explored your work and been on your website, read some of your forthcoming book here, I'm really touched by your deep experience within the church, in your upbringing. I believe continued relationship in that. A lot of the text that you're referencing, in the introduction to your new book, deals with scripture. It deals with the processes of contemplation, from a Christian background. You're quoting Paul, you're quoting, St. Augustine, many others. And so could you start there by, I think a lot of people see those as kind of separate lanes. And I'm very struck by your work of how it is bringing those lanes together in a way that personally feels very significant and important. So maybe
Mhm.
we could start there as far as how you see these elements of your own experience and your professional work intersecting.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And to your point, there are Christians who think these are separate lanes that should not cross, for instance, as well. So I came to the Enneagram sort of accidentally. I wasn't looking for any kind of, psycho-spiritual development program. I am a writer, and I used to write screenplays on the side. So that was my introduction to the Enneagram. I found a book that said, oh, here's how to make more internally consistent characters. So I started reading that book and I thought, oh, this is fascinating. This is interesting. And then when I found my type, which is type 7 or the enthusiast, I was just stunned because I saw myself in those pages and I thought, oh my word, how does someone know what is going on in my brain? How is this even possible? So it was undeniably true to me. And at the same time, I was a Christian. But here's the thing, I think the reason the Enneagram hit me so deeply is because I'm a Christian, because I am a person who's always been very focused on what is my purpose? Why am I on this earth? What am I here to do? And when I first learned about my type and the whole Enneagram model, I realized that I was living a lie, basically. That there was a lie I believed way deep in the core of my being that then had spun me off into this trajectory that wasn't necessarily who I actually was. And that has pretty significant implications for your ability to live out your destiny. So I determined that I was going to follow this through to the end and learn everything that I could about it so that I could not only help myself to walk in my own destiny, but help other people to do it as well. So I think that it's actually a natural connection that really can't be severed in an effective way. So you can teach the Enneagram in business settings and it's awesome. I mean, it just works. It's good stuff. But for people like me who have that spiritual bent and always have, the implications are much bigger.
Well, and
Yeah, thank you,
if I
Heath,
could
just
just,
for start. Oh, go for it, Gabe. Yeah.
yeah, thanks. Just to follow up on that a little bit, what stuck out to me in the intro of your new book is that it's kind of this, the personalities, these types that we learn about through exploring the Enneagram are in a way, like you said, like I've been living an illusion. I'm living a lie that they are in a certain way distorting or keeping us from our experience of a more authentic truth that's deeper than those personality types that are kind of existing on the level of the ego. And so I think that I'm hoping maybe you could expand on that a little bit just to orient our listeners, because I think often, I mean, I really, I don't know enough about the Enneagram, so I really shouldn't speak to the Enneagram community or people who use it. And I'm actually remembering we had a prior guest speaking about the Enneagram a couple years ago, and she used a phrase, you learn the Enneagram to know what you are not, to actually know that this is your patterning, but there's something deeper underneath. And I think that deeper element speaks to, from my understanding, a more spiritual pathway, a journey to know yourself, to know a bigger truth, a power greater than your own, creator, God, the universe. Um,
Yeah.
and we actually have to kind of disrobe ourselves of our illusions to make that journey and arrive there.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that's how many people are often thinking about systems like this, whether it's the Enneagram or your astrological chart, that it's like, it's you, but it's not you. Actually, this is the journey of your illusion back to the discovery of your true reality.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exactly it. And again, as I said, that's what really struck me about the Enneagram when I first encountered it. So the Enneagram posits that there are 9 personality types in the whole world. And within those personality types, of course, there are differences. And of course, every person is unique, but we all have one of those 9 like basic operating systems. So each one of those types has a basic fear, it's called in Enneagram theory. I call it core wounding belief, actually, because it's something that's so wounding and so frightening that, again, it spins you off into a reaction to that fear, to that lie, that then, again, distorts who you actually are. So, for instance, my personality type is type 7, and our core fear is that we're going to get trapped in deprivation or pain. And that is so terrifying, right? In that subconscious, deep inner place, that we're going to do anything we can to not get trapped in deprivation or pain. So that leads 7s then to be fun loving and adventurous and want to do all of the things and have all of the experiences and meet all of the people. So on the one side, that seems like, oh, well, that's fun. You're a fun person to be around and you get the party started. And yes, on one level, that is true. But on the other level, it means that 7s don't want to look at hard things. And yet life is full of hard things. So at some point, you're going to crash and burn because you're not going to be able to outrun the fear and the pain and the deprivation. At some point, you are going to have to face those things, and you're not going to have the spiritual and emotional muscle to be able to handle it. And it's going to be really difficult. And the other part is that relationally, you don't want to be around people who are going to bring you down. You don't want to hear the bad news. You don't want someone coming to you crying about something because of that fear that's way inside you. So it jeopardizes relationships. And again, that's why I do the work that I do on myself and with other people, because I want us to get to a place of truth, a place where we're not just reacting to something that's not even true, but that we are responding to the world as it unfolds, being present to our own lives, and being who we actually are intended to be. You mentioned about, this is who you are not. And that's exactly right. Your number is not some place to plant a flag and throw a party over. There's actually a bit of tragedy in it, quite honestly, right? Because it's based on a lie. And yet even within that lie, there are really beautiful things about each type that are a blessing to the world. So it's a process of learning your patterns, right? Catching yourself in the act, seeing the places where you continue to repeat patterns that are not useful, that are no longer useful. I mean, they were trying to keep you alive when you're a little kid, but as an adult, you don't need them anymore. So it's a process of catching yourself in the act, creating some distance between the impulses that have driven you and your true self, and being able to make a different choice in that moment. That's how we grow. It's sometimes incredibly difficult, but that is the journey that we take when we do any kind of spiritual growth. But the Enneagram is an amazing roadmap that gives you a lot of help along the way.
Yeah, I think Heath, what you're really speaking to, right, is any growth process, personal growth process starts with that self-awareness, right? And for those that are not familiar with Enneagram that are listening, for one, we'll have resources in the show description, but for others, there are all these other tools, right? There are a number of different tools that can help us see that patterning that you're both talking about from different angles. And I think what I have always found interesting about these typology systems and the sort of the philosophy underlying it is that it incorporates both nature and nurture, right? It's talking about how, yes, we have a core nature. And whether you believe in this idea that, hey, that core nature is part of collective consciousness and connected to the divine or not, right? Whether it's just like, hey, it's just DNA, we have a propensity towards things. In either belief system, I think
Mhm.
people will agree that, hey, some of how you show up in the world is then also molded by your environment, your experiences, your
Mhm.
reaction to all those things. And then from that develops what we're calling patterning, right? And that patterning, if we're not looking at it, if we're not understanding it, we can continue to just operate from that patterning
Mhm.
without agency, right? And without the ability to kind of redirect our choices, our actions. And I think what you spoke to there, Heath, is there's actually a very practical application just in our day-to-day lives, right? Putting aside the lofty goal of self-realization even for a minute, I'm just like, hey, like understand people better, understand yourself better, get along, you know, manage our emotions, right? All of that, I think, falls under this umbrella, which is where it, really starts to get so powerful. And I
Mhm.
think what I want to do here, Heath, is come back to part of Gabe's original question, which is that all sounds great, right? What is it that people take issue with, right? Especially for people coming from a faith tradition, what is it that they see in this practice, in this wisdom, in this knowledge base that feels threatening to their worldview, or to the worldview of this particular religion, and would be curious to hear what you experienced yourself as part
Mhm.
of that.
Sure. So, what I want to say first is that all human beings tend to want certainty. And so, anytime something comes along that sort of threatens or questions that certainty, there's definitely a fear response that can happen. That happens across any religion or atheists or whatever, right? Because we tend to get really attached to our worldview and to our opinions. So I don't want to throw my Christian brothers and sisters under the bus. I just want to say that not all of them are in the same place that I am in respect to being open to new ideas. I don't know if you know about the Big Five model of personality. It's pretty fantastic. It again gives an additional set of things for you to be able to look at and try to understand what's going on with you. So in that model, there's one of the five uh, aspects of human behavior is openness to experience. I have a 100% score on openness to experience. So I understand that I am more willing to look at things a little outside the box than other people within Christianity. Okay, so that's one thing. Uh, there are certain personality types, for instance, like type 6, who really want to get anchored into a belief system that they can just like hold on to for dear life. And that's going to be something that makes them feel stable and safe. Okay, so people of that personality type can also have a harder time with um, the, the Enneagram or other things that are kind of outside the norm of Christianity. I can say that, the reason the Enneagram has become so popular over the last few years is because a Christian man and his Christian woman friend created this book called The Road Back to You that had really good marketing and was traditionally published and just took off. So when I first started learning about the Enneagram more than 20 years ago, I'd never heard that word. No one I knew had ever heard that word. And I didn't have any idea that there would be any opposition within Christianity about it. I have since found out that that is not the case. I keep a little file of horrible things that people say to me. Uh, because they're interesting and sometimes they're funny and sometimes they're just sad and I have to pray for people. But one person was convinced that I was a Freemason worshiper of Jupiter and I was leading people to hell with my horrible ideas about the Enneagram and yada yada. So I mean, it runs the gamut, all kinds of things. My last pastor took me aside and asked me not to talk about the Enneagram at church. He had some bad information about it. He thought it involved astrology. He thought it involved, again, to your point, Gabe, new age things, what have you. And he just was not comfortable with me talking about it. However, several years later, after I had proven that I, was not just a weirdo, that I was not some fly by night, that I was a person of integrity, a person who really deeply studied scripture and had been a long-term Christian. This is my 50th year as a Christian. And he knew that I wasn't going to try to lead people astray. And so once he knew that, he gave me license to have an entire class about the Enneagram. After church for 6 weeks, he paid for lunch for everyone, and it was an amazing and beautiful experience. So I feel like the opposition that has happened within my faith has to do with just people not understanding where it's coming from and what's really happening. There's also an issue that I've heard some people say, and a woman who wrote this whole book about how we're not supposed to focus on ourselves. So again, within Christianity, there's the idea of serving other people and not focusing so much on yourself. So people can take that a bit too literally and sort of run with it. Whereas if you look at scripture, it's very clear that you are supposed to be circumspect. You are supposed to be paying close attention to what's going on within yourself, right? So I just try to help people with some verses, help them understand that it's really okay to look at yourself, not in a way that's narcissistic, but in a way that helps you grow, right? And then the other thing that people have had a hard time with is the fact that the person who came up with the original Enneagram of Personality model was not a Christian. So there are people who feel like, oh, it's other. It's not, it doesn't belong to us. We're Christians. We can't have any of that stuff that doesn't come from Christianity. But I'm like, you know what? Who created the light bulb? Was he necessarily a Christian? I don't know. Does it matter? No, light bulbs are amazing and we use them and they bless the whole world, right? Steve Jobs came up with the idea for the iPhone while he was on acid. Do we as Christians now refuse to use iPhones? No, come on. That's just nutty. So I am more willing to receive wisdom from places that are not necessarily Christian. For instance, there's a lot in Buddhism that is really beautiful. I'm not a Buddhist. I do have a deity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But there are some really beautiful and good ideas in Buddhism. I'm not going to kick them to the curb just because they aren't in the Bible. But again, some people are not comfortable with that. They don't have that same openness to experience. And I have to accept that and I have to give them grace for that because that's where they are. You can't force people to grow or change. You just have to take things as they are and find your tribe.
Thanks for sharing all that, Heath. Your openness really shines through just in everything you're sharing, your personality type, and it's very refreshing. Personally, I love that. I think I'm of a similar ilk of, and I think we try to explore that and stake out that space on this show of, saying, openness is a really quality value to experience, and everyone's different, but through openness, we learn and understand about each other, and we're able to maybe move through different what could otherwise be misunderstandings or conflict or violence through the possibilities that come about when we have an open heart, when we are trusting in the goodness of other people, when we afford people grace or afford ourselves some grace. And I would like to think, from my own vantage point, that these are actually religious principles, that are taught. Like, this is what these different great sages and leaders who have emerged throughout history have also tried to teach us, to love one another as ourselves, to be open to one another. And then it just seems like we figure out all sorts of novel ways to get in our own way, like as each generation comes along. And I'm sure I'm participating in that too. We like, as we, this whole topic looks at, we're always kind of like getting wrapped up in the false promises of personality, which is a phrase from your book, which I really enjoyed. You were just talking about the church. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, but because of your positioning and because of your openness, I imagine that you also work with lots of people who are not Christian in your work. I mean, you're giving an interview here to the two of us. We're not Christian either. Rahul and I, we both come from different backgrounds, um, and I guess I'm curious if you could speak to that element too. I think, as Rahul said, probably some way of looking at who is our listenership of this show. Maybe you resonate with this if you're listening to this or not, but spiritual but not religious. And I think especially with the church, the Christian church, there's often a gap or a divide. It kind of feels sometimes like you're either in that world or you're in a kind of more general, broader secular world. I've felt that personally. Moving, I moved 5 years ago here to where I live on Maui, which is actually quite a Christian place. It's much more Christian than where I was living previously in the San Francisco Bay Area. And yeah, there's a kind of uh, sometimes I experience this tension of there's a church close by to our house that I used to take my son to. It was the closest thing around. We could walk to that place from our house, and it would, I really enjoy going to the church there, bringing our son there, being there for some of the services, and then sometimes I would start to feel a little uncomfortable, or ask, like, can I really become part of this community or immerse myself here? I feel like people are wanting to convert me to their view of things, their particular understanding about life, um, and I have my own vantage point, which, from my perspective, I think is harmonious or copacetic with where they're coming from. But I'm not sure that they're going to feel the same way about what my viewpoints are. And so it's like, yes, I'd love to meet you for coffee, but I just don't know if that's really going to work itself out. And so I like. I'm guessing that there's probably a few people listening to our show who might be in a similar boat to me, who are like, oh, okay, wait, this person's Christian. Can I, like, is she going to try to convert me? Can I trust her? Like, what's going on here? And so, like, in your openness and wisdom and in the way you're working with it, like, how do you explore those different sides of that aisle, so to speak,
Mhm.
and find something where you're able to be open and work with people to be true to your own beliefs and in your own faith, but also open and respectful to others, in a way that's not also just like soft and kind of mushy, and it's kind of, okay, well, everyone just kind of believe whatever you want. I'm fine with everything, because I'm sure you're not also.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions. And they're all good and they're all viable. So, I mean, I'll start by saying that I am a Christian through and through, and that's not going to change. I would love it if every human being was also. But I also know that people are each on their own journey, right? So I can come with from a place of love, right? Scripture tells us that God is love. And so I need to accept what is in front of me, right? I need to not argue with reality. So if someone comes to me and they don't share the same faith that I do, it's okay because the Enneagram works for all human beings. If you have a brain, the Enneagram is for you. The Enneagram can help you, right? So again, I'm not going to shy away from what I believe. Again, I mean, my book is called Know Yourself to Know God. That's not very coy, right? but but I love all human beings and I want them to live their fullest self, their truest self. And so if you want to do that but be an atheist or be a Buddhist or be a Hindu or whatever, that I don't have control over that, right? I have control over my ability to help you become the person that you are underneath all of the layers of garbage and wounding that's going on. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, what I hear in that, Heath, is like, hey, self-discovery is a universal path, or universal practice that in a way is separate, even though it's complementary with what we believe from a faith perspective. And it's bringing me back to what you said actually very early in our conversation around, you found the path towards self-discovery or using a tool like the Enneagram particularly energizing because you're a Christian, because you had these questions about meaning. And I'm trying to reconcile that with what you were saying around people wanting certainty. And I think one of the promises of faith traditions, right, is that certainty. And I think even about, so my background, like my family is Hindu, right? I grew up around that tradition, also with a very deep and rich mythology,
Mhm.
which some people take very literally, some people take less literally. And there is a prescription, if we want to look at it that way, for what the meaning of life is, for what our purpose on earth is, for how we are supposed to engage in a path towards spiritual development. And in the Hindu tradition, you have the, call it the out of reincarnation, right? And it's like, hey, this path is not limited to the, you know, 70, 100, 20, 25, whatever number of years you live on the earth in this body, but it continues. And so where I'm going with this is wanting to understand that, hey, if I can look, if I look at a faith tradition as offering the answers as opposed to offering the questions that then lead me down to a different path of inquiry, how am I supposed to relate to any of this stuff? Right? I might still hear it and be like, well, okay, fine, you got this Enneagram thing, self-discovery, but hey, like my scriptures tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do, every day, where I'm supposed to show up, when to pray, when to not pray, how to relate to my neighbor. What do I need this other thing for? Why do I even need to engage in this introspection at all? And I'm asking this less from hopefully from a place of feeling threatened, which I heard the fear response you were talking about, and more just like, how do we reconcile that?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question too. My husband explains it this way. He said, you don't need the Enneagram, but it's basically like strapping a jetpack onto your spiritual journey, right? So I could live my whole life as a Christian without the Enneagram. And it's not like I would show up at the pearly gates and God would be like, oh, you didn't live your best life. Hit the road. That's not what's going to happen. But at the same time, as a believer, as someone who believes that I was made for a purpose, it is my privilege and my duty to figure out what that is, to cooperate with the Holy Spirit to understand what that's about. And I know, because I've lived on the earth a long time, I know that there are people who don't have these questions, right? You guys have met them as well, people who just don't think about this stuff. I mean, my brother, I tried to talk to him about the Enneagram. He's like, I just really don't care. It's like, I'm just going to go drink a beer and watch TV. Like he's not introspective. It's not a thing for him. Right. So again, I can't force that. we have to let his life unfold organically as it's going to unfold. But for those of us who do ask these deeper questions, we can stay within our faith tradition and go about our way, and it's fine. Like you said, Rahul, there are really good guidelines for living that have a lot of wisdom and have a lot of love in them. And yet I was a Christian for like 3 decades before I came upon the Enneagram. And as I studied it, I developed so much more compassion for people, right? Like you would think, duh, that's like who God is, right? God is love. But there's a lot of distance between your head and your heart. It's more than 18 inches. It's like a whole vast universe of stuff that you have to wade through to get down to what's true, and to take things that you believe in theory and work them out in your life. So that's why I would say the Enneagram is so awesomely useful. It will teach you things about yourself and other people that you just had no idea about. It will challenge your assumptions. It will force you to take a hard look at yourself and the things that are not great about how you're showing up in the world. And I just feel like it's an amazing tool. Why would you not use all the tools in your possession or that are available to you to get to a place of greater true selfness, if you will?
I love what you just said there, Heath, about the distance between the head and the heart. That's very profound, and I think so deeply true. Um, and as you're sharing, as we're kind of talking about different religions and beliefs, it's like noticing within myself the impulse to go up into the head, into an abstraction and an idea about, wait, what does that mean? Like you would wish everyone would be a Christian, or like Rahul's background as a Hindu, and like it kind of creates these these abstracted ideas that exist in more of like a polarization or a conflict on a mental plane, and then alongside it, I noticed like a fear of like, can I even talk about that, or should I like is that dangerous? Should I kind of stay away from that? Maybe that would provoke like conflict or something. And then underneath that, I hear you talking about that journey into the heart. What has the Enneagram provided for you? An increased experience of compassion towards others, more self-knowledge of yourself to know your experience with God. And it got me thinking about, you know, there are all these different religions or systems, and we have these beliefs, but maybe a through line that's running throughout them, which we could maybe posit as like a universal truth of more human nature, is that there is this kind of personal relationship, the journey you're describing in your book, that, to really know God or to access some of these things, whatever you're defining that God as, or the associated beliefs with it. I'll describe it for myself as like a power greater than my own. I think you could use kind of more secular language if you like, talk about the universe, without getting into any of the details. But the way that I'm going to access that is through a personal inward journey. And it's going to involve a journey into softening and opening my heart to be able to experience life in a deeper way. And as I kind of connect with that, I'm like, wow, all those ideas in my head, those conflictual ideas are also not just silly, but like painful, and distracting from what is this essential journey that we're talking about, that wherever you might be coming from culturally or religiously, a system like the Enneagram that facilitates that inward journey is
Mhm.
going to help you in your journey of deepening in life, of knowing the source of life, of knowing the joy that goes along with that. And I'm just curious what you think about that, and if that kind of corroborates with your own orientation towards your own spiritual practice. And I think it kind of goes along with this idea of spiritual but not religious, or spirituality, a personal spirituality versus a religious precept or an idea of what you should be doing externally from like a moral standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the thing about religions, that have books or that have specific guidelines is that people can get really fixated on those guidelines. Again, because they want certainty, because they want to make sure they're not making God mad or, whatever. There's all kinds of nutty ideas that people get about God. But it's never, in Christianity anyway, it was never meant that you would read the Bible and that was it. And you never asked a question and you never had a doubt and you just towed the line, you know? Um, there is a whole rich tradition over these last 2000 years of people asking questions, of people not understanding what's going on. Uh, and look, faith is a struggle, what does Israel mean? It means struggles with God, wrestles with God, right? Jacob got that new name, Israel, because he spent the night literally wrestling with God. And that's what we're called to do, really. God doesn't want you just to lay down and just accept a bunch of rules and follow the rules until you die. There's again, to your point, Gabe, there's a relationship that's involved. And in that relationship, you have disagreements. You have things you don't understand. I mean, there have been times when I literally have screamed in rage at God. There was a time when I was in high school too, where I walked away because I, was very brokenhearted. I had a lot of difficulty with my family as a child and a lot of abandonment issues, that kind of thing. And so all I could see about the world was, wow, this world's really painful. There's a lot of crappy stuff that happens and I can't do anything about it. And I'm not interested in living decades more on this earth if this is all there is, right? But I was angry at God because I'm like, God, how can you let these things happen? What's wrong with you? You must not be good. These are classic questions that humans struggle with from, the time that we have existed. So it's not really a certainty thing for me anymore. When I was younger, I absolutely wanted that certainty and I became very rigid. I call myself a recovering Pharisee because, God bless the Pharisees. They were trying to do a good thing, right? They were trying so hard. They loved God. They really wanted to follow those rules, man. And so to make sure they followed those rules, they came up with more rules and more rules to make sure that they were towing the line. But along the way, the rules became the religion instead of the relationship, instead of really being able to enjoy who God is and be able to ask the hard questions and sit in silence and wait for the answer, you know? So I hope that answers your question. I hope I wasn't rambling.
Yeah, actually, Heath, I really want to pick up on what you said here and tie it back to something I said at the outset of the show for myself, right? Which is I myself have been somewhat in this inquiry over the last couple of years of like, do I want to commit to something? So I guess I'll start by saying like, I consider myself a spiritual but not religious person, right? Even having been brought up in the Hindu tradition, being around the Buddhist tradition, and then just being somewhat intellectually aware of Judaism, Shintoism, Christianity, right? And just being around it. But for me, it's been this question of like, hey, like, and I think my scientific materialism has pointed me towards this thinking of like, hey, are all these just things that people made up to find certainty and to find a sense of groundedness and what it means to be alive? And then we had someone on the show a couple of years ago who talked about the trend away from religious participation, right? Especially for the younger generation, and how one of the things that's lost in that, and this has stuck with me since that we had that conversation, was exactly what you just described, right? Which is, hey, you commit to something, and then that creates contradictions. It creates questions that you can then wrestle with. And that is the process of spiritual development, or at least a part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I think about when I think about someone like myself or other people that I think identify as spiritual but not religious, there is an element of being a little bit lost at sea, right? There's a little bit of this element of, okay, we're getting this one thing here, we're getting this one thing from somewhere else, this other thing from somewhere else. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the process, I can say for myself, feels a little bit scattered. At times, it feels a little bit overwhelming. Like there isn't a backbone to the inquiry, right? Or there isn't like a consistency to what I'm looking at. And so I mention all of that because I think what you're sharing and I think what you stand for is this idea that, hey, we can be in conversation and relationship with God, as Gabe said, however you define that. And then simultaneously, we can be engaged in therapy. We can be engaged with a tool like the Enneagram. We can be doing yoga and we can be doing somatic therapy and getting in touch with our bodies. And actually, all of these different practices are all or can all be a part of this process of self emergence and of connection with the divine. Heath, just getting to the question I wanted to ask you is, I feel like we're almost, or at least I'm almost in my mind, arriving at this prescription to myself of like, hey, engage in the faith-based process and continue also to engage with the broader self-discovery path using all the variety of tools that maybe we'd consider more modern, right? Between psychology, therapy, Enneagram, reading, whatnot. And it's feeling like that's where it's starting to converge for me. Is that how you would look at it? Like would you prescribe that as part of process, understanding that you generally meet people where they're at, but and everyone's on their own journey, like you said. But is that what you view to be the path, and the path that's been powerful for you?
Yes. And, I think of the um, famous quote by Augustine: when I was far from me, I was far from you, you being God. So he's speaking to God. And what that says to me is that my true self and God inhabit the same space in my being, right? In all of our beings. And so I do feel like the two things absolutely do converge and should converge and must converge. Because if you're going to continue to live on this earth and navigate it properly, you're going to need some kind of worldview to ground yourself in. To your point, Rahul, when you're saying, how it feels kind of like there's not a backbone, like there's not a spine to stick all of these things on. So they are absolutely, I think, the same journey.
So I love where this conversation's kind of led. And Rahul, I've chatted with you about your own exploration over time. Um, as we getting into this element of the conversation, I'm almost thinking like, wait a minute. So like, what is your true self, and what is God? I mean, and again, setting aside kind of like those, like the scriptural ideas for a moment of what God is, but Heath, could you lead us through that a little bit of like, what does that mean to like discover your authentic self, and that inhabits the same place as God? Well, what is God then? Like when we go through our personality types and arrive to this thing, what is that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So the true self, I think the easiest way to explain it is it's the you that you were before you got wounded. Okay. And that happens almost immediately upon birth, right? Because, for instance, when infants are really little, I think it's the first 3 months, they have no concept of what's called object permanence. So if the mom leaves the room, the mother suddenly no longer exists, right? That's terrifying. So just existing as a tiny human in the world is scary, and that begins to create these fears and these processes for trying to overcome the fear, etc. Okay, so in the Christian way of understanding what makes a human, we have the spirit, the soul, and the body. Okay, body's easy, soul and spirit are a little trickier. Soul, as we understand it, is the stuff going on mostly in your head. right? Your mind, your will, your emotions, your decisions, your preferences. And then the spirit is the part of you that is eternal, that really is the place that's supposed to be in charge. It's supposed to be the place that we are living from. But then because we get these wounds, because we get these fears, the soul takes over and it says, hey, I'll help you. I'll figure this out for you. And here are the patterns that you can follow that will keep you safe, right? That will make you feel certain. So we're supposed to be living from our spirits, but we really are living from our souls, from the broken part of us. And so the spirit is where God dwells. And it's hard for me to talk about who or what God is apart from scripture, because that's primarily how I learned who he is. But I can say that my experience one-on-one with God started out from a place of knowing who he was based on scripture and then encountering him for myself. And so that's a whole additional, more expansive and more beautiful journey and experience of God than I could have imagined, and that I could have gleaned simply from reading some verses that someone wrote down thousands of years ago, right?
So,
And to that, Heath, I mean, my just out of sheer burning curiosity, I was wondering if you'd be open to sharing how you got to that experience, and if it might even be ineffable, but if there's any way to share what that was. Just again, very curious what that was.
Yeah, it's so hard to sort of like retroactively understand, how that process happened, because I wonder it myself sometimes as well, because I'm a teacher, right? I have a teacher's heart. And so I'm always thinking, how can I help people, get to this place of intimacy where I am? But it's tricky to try to figure out how that came to pass. But I would say that, again, I'm 56 years old. I became a Christian when I was 6 years old. It seemed like an amazing deal. Like, wow, okay. You get your sins forgiven and then you get to live in eternity forever with God who loves you. Who wants to pass that up, right? so so that was the beginning. And then, when I was in high school, I left for a time and just rejected God altogether. And then that was like the worst couple of months of my life. And then I came back and really began to understand the love of God better. So from that point, it was really a situation where I just wanted that love. I wanted to experience it. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to be able to give it to other people. And I've read a million books in my lifetime on prayer and, again, intimacy with God. And I've listened to a million sermons. I've given sermons on and on. It's just this cumulative effect, I think. And also the willingness to learn to be still. I love it so much, Gabe, that we started this process, this conversation with some stillness. I do that with my Enneagram group every time we meet, because it's so necessary, right? You got to stop all the chatter that's going on in your brain. You need to get grounded. You need to become present. And so it's been a real process over many years of learning to be quiet and still before the God of the universe, because that's gnarly. And sometimes that's scary because you don't know what you're doing. Every time I go into prayer, I have no idea what's coming, right? I do not know, but I'm convinced that it's going to be good. So I'm always willing to do it. But yeah, my current practice is that I come before the Lord with, I always sing some kind of worship song, right? That gets me in a good place. And then I begin to ask the Lord for, please help me with this situation, or, oh, my friend is really suffering. Could you please come and just comfort her? All those kinds of requests that are going on. And then I just shut up, because imagine, being married to someone and never shutting up. Never listening to what the other person wants to tell you, right? Or never slowing down long enough to let that person hug you. So that's what I do now. I finish what I need to say and then I just be quiet. Sometimes I'll ask a question that I really need clarity about, that I need divine wisdom about. But most of the time these days, I just be quiet and I just feel God. I physically feel it in my body and it feels amazing and beautiful and full of peace. And if God does not say one thing to me, that is totally fine because you become what you behold. And so if I'm just going to, I mean, I'm not going to become God, but I've become more and more like God the more I spend time in his presence and the more I behold him.
Yeah, it's so beautiful what you're sharing, and it's very personally evocative. Um, and a couple of pieces that stick out to me are the stillness that you're speaking about, the silence, and making space to listen. All of that chatter you talk about. I think, it's just, I do coaching work, and I was on a call with a client right before this, and we were just talking about all the to-dos and the activities and the keeping ourselves busy, and what's underneath that is kind of I don't know if he's a seven, but kind of the like not wanting to look at certain things that are like you're kind of distracting yourself from the discomfort of being more present to the fullness of life, and then perhaps the gift that's inside that discomfort if you're willing to slow down and be present with it. And I think, people are learning about that more and more every day. There's more scientific literature out there in a secular context around the idea of mindfulness, right? The efficacy of that. But then the other piece that stood out to me, which I think sometimes gets lost when people are in that more secular world, or like, let's do a mindfulness based stress reduction, kind of orientation where it's like, this is affecting my performance, or it's helping me be less anxious or less depressed or things like that, which science has learned how to measure. Is this love that you talked about, the feeling, the peace, the physical feeling in your body of this wondrousness that probably approaches when you try to describe it or define it. It's like it becomes ineffable, or you can't fully put your finger on it, because even love, it's like the most thrown around word in the world, but when you feel it. And I I'm just curious if there's anything more you might like to share, even though I know it's hard, about that physical feeling of your encounter with God, and physical, soulful, spiritual feeling, and kind of the impact that has on your own experience in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is hard to describe. I am not, I think, well, I know I'm not a typical person. I've always been a little kind of out there on the fringes, right? So I know that not all Christians actually physically feel that love. I get that, but I do, and I treasure it, and I always want to cultivate it and make sure that every day I'm spending time in that love, because it feels like nothing that you've ever felt on earth. I mean, I totally love my husband. I'm super into him. I dig him big time. But the love of God is nothing like human love. You absolutely can tell the difference once you've experienced it. It's huge. It's other. It's warm. It's calm. It's just the calmest thing in the world. It's so wild. I can come in with so much stress and so much grief and whatever else from my day, from my whole life. And I come into that place of quietness with God, and here he comes. Actually, I mean, it's not so much he's coming down, it's that he's coming out, he's coming up, right? Because Christians believe that God lives inside us. And so it's this welling up. And I actually, most of the time, can feel it starting. It's like a gyroscope. And it starts about here in my stomach almost. And I feel it just sort of winding up, like, oh, here he comes. Oh, yay. I've created this environment, where God feels like, oh, good, I can come hang out now. and it just it floods my body. It's really quite a wild phenomenon that's just hard to explain.
That, I mean, that right there, I think already, Heath, was just so beautifully explained as far as it goes. And what I'm just like ruminating on right now, Gabe earlier talked about having a through line, between all these different systems and points of knowledge. And I'm actually just feeling a through line more than even, and then trying to intellectualize like what is that through line? Even in Hinduism, right? This idea, like the Bhagavad Gita, right, which is one of the major scriptures of Hinduism, also is really about this idea that God lives within us, right? This idea of the spirit, and describes multiple ways to return to God, essentially, right? And one of them, the one that's sort of called the supreme way of returning to God, is really it's devotion, but devotion as a way of describing love, right? It's like tuning into a love for God, and that being the devotional practice. At least that's how I understand all of this. And I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about what we talked about with, that what you were saying around the spirit really being the true self, right? Even spiritual and not religious, right? Is It's really concerned with this practice of connecting with that source, that source that sort of predates and outdates all of these other things, the personality, the body, the intellect, right, the soul as you described it. All of that, is feels surface level, and so I'm feeling just this excitement around what feels like a convergence of a lot of these different ways of relating to what might essentially be the same concept. And then there's another part of me that's that's also present, which is more maybe this like the skeptic, which is like, hey, we're really converging a lot. This is great, but is this starting to get too like, are we all just drinking too much of the same Kool-Aid? you know, and if I'm just a person that's maybe not coming into this conversation with some of the, we'll call it the starters, the bread starters of some of these belief systems, or just even believing in the concept of the spirit in the way that I think all three of us do in our own ways. I'm curious, when you either encounter people like that, or if you were just speaking to someone like that right now, Heath, how would you invite them to even consider what we've been talking about? Like, what's that bridge to someone that's coming from that place that occurs to you here?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the person because, as I said, some people just don't care about this stuff, you know? But if there's someone who maybe cares or is thinking about caring, is thinking about exploring, spirituality, I would say, what do you have to lose? You know, why not give it a
Mm,
whirl? I mean, there's no downside, really.
I love it. So simple.
But I'm curious there, Rahul, if you keep embodying that character, like what are the downsides? Like I feel like you could articulate some of them. Like what are could you lose if you open up or give it a try, like Keith is saying?
I feel like the biggest thing that's coming up from that character, other than like, oh man, that's gonna take so much time, blah blah, is something along the lines of like just not being able to reconcile that the premise of a spirit and of all these layers with what I can see. Right. It's the like, it's the, I guess, the tension between scientific materialism and observation and replicability with, what we might consider from that place to be like a sort of a hokey or rah-rah set of concepts. And I think that's maybe the voice that's coming out there is like, I don't know, I don't know. Is this Does this make sense? Like, how do I reconcile it with what I see?
Any insight, Heath?
I mean, that's a really valid point, right? We have the Greek mindset and we have the Hebrew mindset. And Europe, the Western world operates on the Greek mindset, fact-based, observability, right? What can I see? But the Hebrew mindset is much more open to mystery and uncertainty. And I love it that my particular Enneagram journey again took me out of legalism, right? Phariseeism, and has brought me to such a greater place of being willing to embrace and accept mystery and even to love mystery, right? Because God is not understandable ultimately, like you can understand a bit, but God is infinite. How in the world are you going to hold that in your brain? You can't. So I would just say learn to be okay with not understanding and not knowing. That's been a huge shift for me as I've studied the Enneagram. Again, another thing that it's been transformative for in my life. So yeah, that's what I would say. Get comfortable with mystery because you're going to have a lot of it in your life.
So Heath, thank you so much for just like an incredibly rich conversation. I'm tracking the time. We're kind of getting close to wrapping up here. Um, I have two questions. One is I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about your books and where folks might be able to find them, where the new book will be coming out. I'm guessing a lot of people would be interested if they've listened and joined us in this conversation to learn more with you. So that's one thing. And then the second, and I have no idea if this works or not, or you can, but based on our conversation, what Enneagram types do you think that Rahul and I are? And what should we start? Where can we start learning about our Enneagram types?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. No idea. Because to really get someone's Enneagram type, to really understand that, you need to see them in a variety of different situations, right? So you need to find out like what makes them angry, and when they're angry, how they show up, right? Like what their reaction is. You need to find out what gives them joy, and just looking at their daily life routines, all that kind of stuff. So that's the first thing I'll say about it. The second thing is that I would not rob you of your journey by telling you what I thought you were, by telling you what I think your Enneagram number is, because that I feel like is truly a sacred journey. And I do not want to steal that from you. So do your homework.
Well,
That's
I'll tell you, Heath, just while we're on it, that I'm a 9 with a 1 wing.
okay.
So
All right then. Right on. So then about my books. My first book is called Becoming Your True You: God, the Enneagram, and Your Unique Purpose. And that's available on Amazon. And that really felt like my manifesto, like this is my heart. This is what I want for myself and for everyone else, to learn the Enneagram as a tool to help you become who you were intended to be. And the second book is called Know Yourself to Know God, which you mentioned earlier. And that's a much smaller book. It's got maybe like 27 pages of introductory material. It's a bit condensed from the first book. And then what I feel like is the most important part is to take that information from those first pages and apply it to this 30-day journaling journey, I call it, where you look at each type. You look at a scripture or an awesome quote from Thomas Merton or one of the other, mystical, wonderful saints we've had in our 2,000-year history, and see how it applies to your life. Spend every day in stillness. We have a stillness practice every day. And then questions about your inner critic, right? What is that voice in your head saying about yourself and other people? And it's designed to take the ideas behind the Enneagram and make them a daily practice that helps, again, bring that organic transformation that occurs when you're on a spiritual journey like this. And that's coming out March 14th. And that is also going to be available at Amazon.
that's so great. And I can say I'm personally excited to engage on that one. I think anything that takes the idea into something that we can engage with it every day. I think there's always opportunity, and that meets a need that's really out there. From my end, he just wanted to also reiterate what Gabe was saying. Just wanted to thank you for this time, for your attention, for your energy, for your wisdom. This has been a really fun ride, and just getting to explore all these nooks and crannies of your journey and sort of tie that back to what we're looking to explore on this show has been really gratifying. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you both. You guys ask fantastic questions, and it's just been a joy.
Heath, as we close out, is there any kind of single takeaway or a little nugget that you'd like to leave listeners with?
Wow. I would say that the spiritual journey is a struggle that's absolutely worth it. So if anybody's on the fence and trying to figure out what they want to do, or how they want to proceed, I just want to encourage you, be brave. It's an act of courage to go on a journey like this. But what else are you going to do with your life? Come on, like what else is there really? Just go
Beer and
for it.
pizza.
Yeah. Just give it a try, and you are most likely going to be astonished at the miracles that show up.
Amazing. Well, Heath, thank you so much. We're going to close out our show today on that note. If you've been listening to this episode and joined us all the way through, thank you for giving us your time, your attention. I hope that it's been valuable for you. I trust that it has been, considering all the rich insights and stories that Heath has shared with us from her own journey, her own knowledge and wisdom. And so we're just wishing you well. We are here. You can check out our other episodes. We are publishing on a monthly schedule this year in season 4 of Woven Wings Live. And so if you enjoy listening to us, again, we ask that you please share this with someone who you think could benefit from hearing this conversation. Leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. That also helps people to find our show. And we are wishing you well. You can join our newsletter in the show description. You can find links to Heath's work, books, and everything else good in there. And we will catch you next time. Thank you for tuning in and taking the time out of your day for this. And we will see you out there. Take care.